Mariupol, 28 days later, a horror film from the sky, and you can see why they have called this the ashes of a dead land. A strategic city on an important coastline, totally destroyed. As tank battles rage in the centre of Mariupol, there is no reliable number for the dead. Those who got out have described seeing civilian bodies left on the ground. And while the Ukrainian army fights street to street against the Russians, there are still believed to be well over 100,000 civilians left in the city hiding.
Бедный народ.
The Russians here in Mariupol are bolstered by Chechen forces from the pro-Putin regime of Ramzan Kadyrov. No wonder, they say, this city now looks like the worst of Grozny. In the Kiev suburb of Bucha, there are Chechen volunteers here too, but these ones are fighting on the Ukrainian side. This is the Sheikh Mansour battalion, named after an 18th century Chechen resistance leader who fought the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. In this area, just outside the capital, the Ukrainian advance claims to have surrounded Russian forces. A rare glimpse of a Russian funeral. Andrei Pally, first-rank captain and deputy commander of the Black Sea Fleet headquartered in Crimea, was killed outside Mariupol on Saturday. Perhaps this funeral was publicised because Pally was born in the Ukrainian capital Kiev, but pledged allegiance to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin returned fire in the economic war, declaring European buyers of Russian gas will now have to pay in rubles, forcing them to prop up his currency. His foreign minister Lavrov was looking forward to tomorrow's NATO summit, warning against any Polish ideas about international peacekeepers in Ukraine.
Польские наши коллеги уже заявили, что сейчас будет саммит НАТО, надо направлять миротворцев туда. Они, я надеюсь, понимают, о чем они ведут речь. Это будет то самое столкновение прямое российских и натовских вооруженных сил, которого все не то что хотели избежать, а говорили, что никогда его не должно состояться в принципе.
But Putin also suffered the resignation of political ally and climate envoy Anatoly Chubais, who is reported to have left the country. Leaving their country today, these refugees from the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv, arriving in Poland together, but each one with a heartbroken story.
Мені прийшлось тікати, бо у нас вже все зруйновано. Немає ні газу, ні світла, ні води. Уже діти, вся молодь гине. У мене залишився син у Чернігові, дочку я забрала з собою. Болить душа, за все болить душа. Повернутися вже нікуди, жилого масиву немає, все знищено, все геть знищено.
The Human Rights Ombudsman for Ukraine says the people left in Chernihiv are now effectively hostages as Russia has cut off the routes for humanitarian aid. Less than a month in, and they are already fearing the next Mariupol. Well, in the south of Ukraine, the outskirts of Odessa were hit by shelling for the first time this week, and the historic port city is now bracing itself for a battle. Russian forces have been slowly advancing along the southern coastline as they try to cut off Ukrainian access to the Black Sea. They have been stopped in their tracks so far at Mykolaiv, but Odessa is almost certainly their end goal. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is there. Alex.
Yes, curfew now, so we can have the lights on for a very few minutes, so we'll keep this one tight. The curfew comes on here at 8 o'clock local time, 6 o'clock your time, and it's being strictly enforced. As you say, genuine sense of foreboding, based really on what's been happening further along the coast at Mariupol and what is coming ever very, very slowly, but nearer and nearer to this, the third city of Ukraine. We'll have more on that tomorrow from this city. But as we crossed over the border today from Moldova, a little bit of a piece of impromptu political theatre. Small group of US congressmen and women ventured into Ukraine for a few hundred feet and then went back again. But whilst they were on Ukrainian soil, I took the chance to ask one of them to respond to these extraordinary comments from the Kremlin spokesman Viktor Peskov last night, who said that Russia reserved the right to use nuclear weapons if, in his words, it faced an existential threat. This is what their spokesman told us.
Well, clearly, Ukraine is not the aggressor here. And so I think it's similar to the allusion that Vladimir Putin made several weeks ago about the putting all his nuclear forces on alert. So it's a threat, but it's troubling.
And thus far, a very measured response from the US so far. And is that the tone that we're going to see continuing here?
I would hope so, and I'm not surprised. Clearly, the Russian people are not under threat here. This is an invasion of Ukraine and a threat to those people. So clearly, there's no existential threat for Russia. Russian troops are murdering children and innocent civilians. So clearly, that's the case.
Well, whilst you were listening to that, two things on this deserted streets, almost deserted streets below me. Police escorting one vehicle one way and a group of police on foot, shining a torch and just patrolling up the main boulevard, which stretches down that way across the city. Clearly, there's a very great deal of security here. We'll have a full report on the state of play here in Odessa, the third city in Ukraine, for you tomorrow night.
Alex Thompson. Well, now to Georgia, which has an uncomfortable number of things in common with Ukraine. Neither belongs to Nato or the EU. Both are former Soviet republics, and both have a history of being invaded by Russia. In 2008, Russian forces started Europe's first 21st century war by invading Georgia. The conflict itself was over within a matter of days, but Georgia knows better than most countries what Russian aggression means. Earlier today, I spoke to Georgia's president, Salome Zurabishvili, and started by asking what her view is of what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, I'm watching the events with great concern for the Ukrainian population, for the Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting in such difficult conditions. I'm also watching with great admiration because tomorrow it will be 1 month that the war started. And I think that they have defeated all the expectations that this would be a short war, that Russia was so powerful that they would overcome the Ukrainian defenses. And they have proven Vladimir Putin very wrong.
Are the Georgian people straightforwardly on the side of the Ukrainian people?
They are completely on the side of the Ukrainian people, and they cannot be otherwise, because we have gone through the same war in 2008, so we know what it looks like, even if the war in Georgia was much shorter, but the capacities of the resources, military resources of Georgia are nothing close to what Ukraine has, and that is the reason why the Georgian population is very united, and practically you cannot walk on the streets of Tbilisi without seeing Ukrainian flags everywhere.
Do you fear that you will be next? And do you think Russia would try to move in to Georgia regardless of what happens in Ukraine? Because victory in Ukraine is not straightforward, as we're seeing.
Ukraine, the victory is not straightforward, and it's already a defeat. Whatever happens next, it is already a defeat for Russia. It's a defeat for Russian power projection. It's a defeat because it has united Europe. It's a defeat because it has shown that Europe and the States are ready this time for sanctions that they have never been before. It's a defeat because now everybody understands what Russia is in essence. and what Russian imperialism means. What will be next? I don't know whether it would be Georgia or something else, or whether we will have a totally different Russia. All of that are speculations that I have no capacity to make at this stage.
You're being very clear, but we are also reading here that Georgia is not straightforwardly united and that the governing party, perhaps even the Prime Minister, feels differently to the way you're speaking.
Well, I don't think that he feels differently. He has been more cautious, maybe, in his wording than I am. That's a difference of character, maybe. But I don't think there is any difference. The population, again, is completely united. We have 20,000 Ukrainian refugees in Georgia. We also have about the same number of Russians that have left Russia, and most probably have left Russia because they do not agree with the way their government is launching this war against Ukraine.
The Western world meets tomorrow in Europe. Is there anything you would like them to do to guarantee the security of Georgia?
I think that I cannot not mention that after the war in 2008, we had since then a European Union monitoring mission on the occupation line that has provided a sense of security. Of course, they are not there to defend militarily, but they are there to observe and monitor, and that has been something very important. And I think what is at stake tomorrow, and that is the peacekeepers mission in Ukraine, that would be an important step. And I think that the Russians know that, and that's why they are making again threats.
So how do you believe peace can be brought to Ukraine?
I think that the compromise is something that the President Zelensky is the one that should decide what is the compromise that he would be ready to accept. He has paid a very high price. His population has paid a very high price. And so the compromise is something that has to be in line with the price that he has paid.
And do you believe President Putin would respect a compromise?
Well, he will respect if he's contrived to respect. He will never respect by his own choice. And if the West remains united, if the sanctions remain in force, if he feels that there is strength on the Western side, and I think he will feel it, then he might respect.
Madam President, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, President Biden is on his way to Europe for a summit of NATO leaders tomorrow. On the agenda is beefing up support not just for Ukraine, but to all countries deemed to be at risk from Russian pressure. Our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy joins me now from the State Department. Siobhan.
Well, Christian, the President is due to touch down any moment now in Brussels ahead of the extraordinary meeting of NATO members tomorrow. Ahead of him arriving, his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has announced that after a careful review of public and intelligence sources, that the US has concluded that members of the Russian forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. Crucially, that means that those forces they have found have been deliberately targeting civilians. Now, they did not name, obviously, any names or even say where those war crimes had been committed, though they did point to the atrocities that we have seen in recent days and weeks in Mariupol. They said that they would pass the information on to allies, to partners and to other international institutions who are investigating currently war crimes. Well, earlier I attended the briefing here at the State Department and I asked the Ambassador Beth Van Schaak, who is the Ambassador at Large for criminal justice, whether or not this assessment today includes the president of Vladimir Putin. Let's hear what she had to say.
President Biden obviously branded Vladimir Putin himself a war criminal. Then the Secretary of State said that he personally agreed with him. I wonder, does this assessment also include crimes by Vladimir Putin himself? And if not, why not?
Well, we have looked broadly at Russia's forces, and the conclusion and assessment is that Russia's forces are committing war crimes. I think that's consistent with the two prior statements.
Well, I also asked, one of the things that we know that they're going to decide on during these meetings over the next few days is what the unified response would be if Vladimir Putin uses nuclear, chemical or biological weapons? Would that, I asked, be a red line that would draw forth a direct military involvement of NATO members, including, crucially, the United States? The State Department spokesman, though, would simply only say what the President has said, and what he said is he reiterated this morning as he left on Air Force One. It would reiterate, he said, and I quote, a very strong response. They would not say whether that response would include any military information, simply that the response would be a very strong one.